In the towering halls of Zoraxis Prime, where the war banners of the Hellar Dominion fluttered like warnings, General Vark's booming laughter echoed through the War Council chamber as surveillance drones fed them live footage of Terran peacekeepers, deploying what looked like rusted agricultural bots onto the lush green moon of Shalene 4. The laughter fractured abruptly when an unauthorized figure, Commander Lyra Vale, entered the chamber in a dusty, unarmored exocoat, hands empty save for a steaming mug. "You're assuming we're here to fight." "That's flattering," she said coolly, her voice barely louder than the hum of the security drones hesitating at her sides. From orbit, her silent companion, Lieutenant Ro Callan, monitored the descent of Echo drone nodes, devices dressed like farm equipment but secretly pulsing out ghost signatures and data noise into the jungle below. Dominion scouts landing on Shalene 4 began reporting equipment anomalies, radar loops, conflicting thermal readings, auditory hallucinations of phantom footsteps. They investigated the Terran tech, but found no aggression, no response, just unmoving metal pods and unnervingly quiet foliage. Their HUDs blinked with false confirmations, warning systems tangled in recursive logic. Commander Drell's unit went dark first, followed by erratic broadcasts. Troops speaking in loops, shooting at reflections, vanishing into foliage that seemed to breathe back. In orbit, Vale sipped her drink and whispered, "They're not in combat, they're in therapy." As Dominion Command tried to recalibrate, Vale revealed the weapon, Project Mirage Field, not a physical arsenal, but a cognitive trap, a testbed to analyze how the Hellar perceived threat, command, failure. "You were never fighting us," she told Ambassador Tevin during a silent holo briefing. "You were fighting your need to be in control." The Hellar launched a last resort AI battalion, only to find the drones on Shalene 4 forming a perfect circle and emitting pulse harmonics that rendered targeting systems useless and turned squad leaders against their own simulations. Then came the final blow. Not an explosion, but a broadcast. Every Dominion mistake, panic, and misfire logged, visualized, and streamed across their empire. The jungle moon was locked down, declared cursed. Vale descended unarmed, walking through Hellar shock troopers frozen in existential malfunction. "You don't get to surrender," she said softly. "You get to understand." She left behind the echo nodes, still humming, still watching. Back home, she filed her report without urgency, placing her mug, still warm, on the console's edge as she signed off. "We didn't defeat them," she noted in her log. "We let them reveal who they already were." The moon Shalene 4, silent and emerald, unfolded beneath the hazy Terran orbit craft like a reluctant stage. From high above, Commander Lyra Vale watched as the Dominion's response fleet fanned out, their ships descending like surgical scalpels. She made no move. The echo nodes had already seeded themselves, some embedded beneath roots, others masquerading as rusted Terran relics, their surfaces flaking with intentional oxidation to provoke dismissal. Dominion scout units touched down in staggered formations, their drop pods blasting steam into the dense air, which clung unnaturally thick to everything. The jungle didn't welcome them, it studied them. Drell's squad advanced cautiously, their boots crunching foliage that wasn't supposed to sound like glass. They expected resistance, traps, even old-fashioned Terran mines. What they found instead were idle machines, drone husks with moss on their hulls, blinking as though they had no idea they were being observed. A scout prodded one with the barrel of his rifle. Nothing. Another tried to scan it, but his system glitched and began auto-rotating its linguistic interface through dead languages. Their commander ordered a diagnostic sweep. Results were contradictory. Temperature sensors recorded both boiling and freezing air from the same patch of jungle. Radar showed copies of themselves moving alongside them, but visual confirmation revealed only trees. A Dominion comms operator reported an intruder in their camp, only to realize the voice had come from her own recorded logs, played backward. All the while, Vale remained still in orbit, her eyes never leaving the calm chaos below. Callan stood behind her, quietly tapping data glyphs that shimmered against the air like fog held in place. "They're twitching," he said. Vale nodded. "They're thinking too hard, that's the point." Down below, logic began to buckle. Dominion soldiers stopped trusting their equipment. One corporal shot at his own thermal shadow. Another whispered about hearing Terran lullabies through his helmet. The echo nodes weren't attacking. They weren't moving. They were recording, scraping. Layers of fear, aggression, and protocol response into live patterns. The jungle responded with behavioral mimicry. Noises heard only once were looped back in surround sound. Faint visual doubles began appearing in the corner of each soldier's field of view. General Vark's orders to push forward came fragmented, distorted by atmospheric interference, an effect the Terrans had named thought fog. Commander Drell, increasingly isolated, activated a fail-safe purge protocol to burn a clearing through the jungle. The fire ignited. It spread. It should have cut a path. Instead, the flames formed symbols, old Hellar warglyphs, mapped perfectly into a ring. His troops halted, not from heat, but from recognition. Symbols from their own doctrine, reprojected from memory into fire. Panic began to ripple. Meanwhile, Vale leaned back in her chair, the corner of her mouth tilting up just enough to unsettle. "It's not an attack," she said aloud to no one. "It's a reflection." From orbit, a fresh wave of drones deployed, each designed to passively scan neural frequency anomalies and emotion-adaptive micro-reactions. Some settled into tree trunks and began pulsing. Others embedded into rocks that bled when touched. A scout trying to transmit an alert back to high command was stunned when his own transmission came back an hour before he'd sent it. "This is Scout Aaron. Shalene 4 is," the message said, then cut to static. Aaron had not yet spoken those words, and yet the timestamp proved he had. His voice cracked. "This place is wrong." Back aboard the orbital ship, Callan began to overlay Dominion behavior data in real time. He pointed to the display. "We're starting to get divergence curves. Their logic chains are spiraling. Threat perception is fragmenting into binary extremes. They're choosing violence where silence would serve. They're seeing patterns in static." Vale sipped her coffee. "Perfect. That means it's working." Dominion leadership ordered a regroup, but it was too late. Inside the jungle, time began to stretch. Sensor logs showed seconds repeating. Units thought they had moved 20 meters forward. In truth, they had looped the same patch 5 times. Helmets began to lock into combat empathy mode, a rarely used training protocol that mimicked the feelings of nearby soldiers. The Hellar had designed it for unity. The echo nodes exploited it for entropy. When one panicked, all did. And so, surrounded by machines that never moved and threats that never struck, the might of the Hellar Dominion began to rot, not from violence, but from inside the mind. And up in orbit, watching her reflection on the black glass, Lyra Vale whispered, "It's not what we do. It's what they become." Darkness bled into the minds of the Hellar troops long before the artificial night fell over Shalene 4's jungles. By the time Scout Commander Drell initiated his final tactical sweep, he was already uncertain whether his men were following orders or merely acting out a ghost script composed by the jungle itself. Comms no longer confirmed identity. Calls were responded to before they were made, and some voices answered in languages the Dominion hadn't spoken in centuries. It wasn't just interference. It was mockery. And the drones, those rusted, low-energy things, they remained exactly where they had been, humming faintly like patient beasts. Every time the Hellar attempted to triangulate them, the results came back as observer only, non-hostile. But the illusion was perfect, too perfect. Soldiers swore they saw their own faces inside cracked reflection lenses. Heat sensors reported heartbeats from rocks. Trees repeated orders seconds after they were given, slightly off-key like a cruel choir of misremembered protocol. And up in orbit, Lyra Vale watched the patterns unfold with clinical detachment, her gaze fixed on a single line of telemetry. Behavioral Fragmentation Index, Hellar Forces, 76% and climbing. "Run the playback," she said, not taking her eyes off the feed. Callan tapped the projection console, and holograms swirled to life around her, full recon logs from the Dominion squads below. In one, a Hellar lieutenant barked orders at shadows that mimicked his every gesture with a delay of 3 seconds. In another, a soldier calmly removed her helmet and wept over the sound of someone else humming her mother's lullaby. In yet another, Scout Commander Drell screamed into a private channel demanding to know who among his unit was leaking his dreams to the comms net. And always, the drones sat still, watching, recording, shaping nothing, and yet everything. Callan's voice was low. "We're getting full emotional telemetry now. Responses to stimuli, aggression spikes, compassion troughs. They're unraveling." Vale set her mug on the armrest of her chair. "Time for the truth." With a swipe, she opened a secure relay to Ambassador Tevin, the only Hellar official still capable of civil discourse. He appeared, eyes hollow, his face twitching with the signs of suppressed panic. "You've weaponized perception," he muttered. "This isn't warfare. It's cruelty." Vale gave him nothing but silence for a long beat, then finally spoke, voice level. "Project Mirage Field was never designed to kill. It was a test site, a mirror array. You were never fighting us. You were fighting your assumptions. Every move you made was based on incorrect certainty. Every tactic you used exposed a fault line in how your empire thinks." Tevin blinked slowly. "You mean this was an experiment?" Vale nodded. "A very old one. We planted the first nodes here 2 decades ago. Let them sleep beneath the soil. They don't attack. They listen. They learn." Her voice dipped, almost kind. "And then they teach." Back on the surface, the Hellar began to self-destruct, not by choice, but by function. Fire teams turned on each other over conflicting orders they never gave. AI-assisted targeting systems began ranking their own officers as psychological threats. Logic loops turned environmental sensors into screaming alerts of non-existent predators. Some soldiers refused to move at all, standing catatonic in flooded meadows, whispering Terran command codes they had never been taught. The jungle became a stage of tragic pantomime, with every troop unknowingly performing the collapse of their own doctrine. In a last gasp effort, Dominion Central Command deployed elite shock units, AI-integrated combat specialists trained for worst-case scenarios. They dropped onto Shalene 4 with pristine clarity and overwhelming firepower, but as their boots hit the ground, the circle was already forming. The echo nodes, long dormant, began to rise, not in aggression, but in unison, assembling into a perfect ring around the AI squads. And then came the hum. A deep, resonant frequency so low it vibrated through armor and bone, through code and thought. One by one, the elite unit's HUDs turned black, then flared back to life, displaying a single message in every Dominion dialect. "Your weapons are still yours. Your decisions are not." Tevin watched this unfold through a filtered feed provided, graciously, by the Terran Continuum. He turned to Vale, eyes rimmed red. "This will cause outrage, revenge, consequences." But she shook her head. "No, this will cause understanding. You don't get to surrender. You get to comprehend." The echo nodes began to pulse again. But now their output wasn't confusion, it was memory. Simulated playback of every soldier's worst instinct, every escalation, every breakdown, turned into data, turned into story. It was all being broadcast across Hellar networks now. Not a threat, a tutorial. On the edge of the system, dozens of Hellar colonies began to fall quiet. Military channels grew silent. Some outposts simply powered down their defenses. Not in defeat, but in reflection. Vale stood from her chair, slow and steady, and walked toward the observation bay, watching the ring below. They weren't supposed to lose, she said to herself, more than to Callan. Just to learn. We're not here to win. We're here to rewire what victory means. Behind her, the coffee mug sat steaming, its inscription worn, but still legible. Patience is a weapon, too. As the final sequence unfolded on the jungle moon of Shalene IV, the Hellar Dominion's last bastion of strategic arrogance collapsed beneath its own weight. The battlefield, if it could still be called that, lay eerily calm. The echo drones stood silently in their perfect circle, humming their subsonic resonance through the vines and mist like a funeral hymn composed by logic itself. The elite Hellar AI shock units, deployed as the final answer, had ceased moving. Their targeting systems now cycled in recursive diagnostics, all coming to the same unalterable conclusion: no valid target. Their visual inputs displayed scenes out of time, future defeats, past mistakes, present contradictions, all pulled from predictive telemetry the Mirage field had harvested from years of Dominion combat doctrine. It wasn't hallucination. It was their own data, turned against them in intimate, surgical form. Commander Lyra Vale stood aboard the Terran orbital cruiser Verdict of Silence, her arms folded, posture calm, but charged with finality. The bridge around her was quiet, lit only by the soft pulse of mirrored tactical readouts showing the Hellar units twitching against their own programming. Lieutenant Ro Callan adjusted the cognitive dampeners in the room as a precaution. The drone field's harmonics had begun to leak into the command channels, causing officers to experience momentary emotional echoes, flashes of fear that weren't theirs. "Field saturation is complete," Callan said, voice filtered through. A desensitized feed. All Dominion units are now operating in nested contradiction. They can't advance, can't retreat. They've become still frames in a simulation they think they control. Vale nodded. That's the lesson. She walked to the central platform, where a single transmission line still pulsed red, direct line to Hellar High Command. She opened the channel. A dozen Hellar officials appeared. Generals, strategists, their features gaunt, their eyes unblinking. Behind them, the banners of their dominion sagged. One, perhaps the youngest, leaned forward, his voice hollow. "You could have destroyed us. Why didn't you?" Vale raised an eyebrow slightly. "Because destruction ends the conversation." "This was a dialogue," another general snarled. "This was psychological violation." "No," she said, her tone precise. "This was a psychological diagnosis." The screen split into multiple feeds, one showing Dominion troops watching their own panic broadcasts, another showing battlefield HUDs overridden with captions like, "Is this your first thought, or one you were programmed to have?" And another, perhaps the cruelest, showing Hellar citizens reacting to these revelations, shocked, uncertain, human. On Shalene IV, the drones began their final act. The circle shifted, not expanding, not contracting, but rotating slowly, like a dial. The frequency changed, not in intensity but in emotion. No longer confusion, now sorrow. The jungle itself joined in, wind through the leaves, water dripping from bioluminescent branches, sounds shaped by sonic fields to echo the tones of regret. Hellar soldiers, those who had not short-circuited or fled into dissociative silence, fell to their knees, not from injury, but comprehension. Every trigger pulled had been predicted. Every command issued had been echoed back. Every fear, seen, catalogued, and mirrored. They had not been fighting enemies. They had been fighting blueprints of their own unchecked reflexes. From orbit, Vale initiated the final transmission. Not an order, not a threat, but a gift. A complete copy of Project Mirage Field's logs was released directly into the Dominion's central archive. Every behavior loop, every emotional peak, every failure to adapt. The file was titled, Reflections of Power. There was no encryption, no virus, no trap, just truth, open and ugly, a mirror without distortion. As the Halar officials processed this, Vale spoke again. "We didn't take your power. We just helped you see what it's built on." She closed the transmission. Shalene 4 was immediately declared a no-entry zone by both Terran and Dominion authorities, not because it was dangerous, but because it was too honest. The echo nodes were left in place, still humming, still waiting. Some say they're still recording. Others say they've begun to dream. Vale returned home not to parades but to silence, a few nods from fellow operatives, a silent bow from the Council of Strategic Thought. She walked into her quarters, unfastened her exocoat, and placed her coffee mug on a shelf beside her, a quiet shrine of practiced stillness. On its ceramic surface, the words had faded further, but still readable beneath the steam rising from the fresh pour. "They thought we brought weapons. We brought a mirror." She sat, opened her final log entry, and dictated in the same voice she had used all along. Measured, detached, unshaken. Mission conclusion. Subject civilization achieved insight. Primary objective not to induce surrender, but self-awareness. Tactical passivity succeeded. Psychological resilience confirmed. We gave them the mirror. They broke it, and in the shards, they finally saw themselves. Then she leaned back, sipped her drink, and let the stillness of a one war, without violence, settle into her bones.